Welcome to the Chameleon Academy. Today we're going to be talking about the 5 commandments of chameleon hatchling care. There is a lot to learn about taking care of a chameleon hatchling. It is the most delicate life stage of a chameleon. But remember these 5 commandments and it will serve you well throughout your entire chameleon keeping career. Commandment 1, keep chameleon hatchlings in their own cage from day one. Generally speaking, we all kind of know that chameleons should be kept individually. Well, that actually extends all the way to day 1. Yes, chameleon hatchlings straight from the egg should not be kept together. Now, I acknowledge that those of us in the community over the last couple decades, we have tried to do the group raising and we've been pretty successful at it. But that is not proper chameleon husbandry. And I implore you, do not develop the skills of separating the bullies out that allows you to get away with group raising. Don't develop skills in improper husbandry. Put the work in up front to put in the infrastructure so you can have individual cages for each baby chameleon that you are raising. We have gotten to a point in our community where we're starting to understand the value of giving ideal care to each individual baby. And this is replacing an attitude that the hatchling stage is something we've got to get through as quickly as possible so we can sell them and send them to a new home. But we are now part of Gen E, the enrichment generation, where we actually care about the mental and emotional state of our chameleons. Because chameleons are solitary by nature. Even as hatchlings, as soon as they hatch out of the egg, they disperse. Although we humans see this as a lonely life, they are built differently. They don't see it as a lonely life. They are very happy with their solitary life. Yes, they interact in the wild, but they don't live in each other's space. When hatchling chameleons are kept together, the stress starts. They compete for food. They bully each other. They try to exert dominance over each other. And this is just a normal part of what a chameleon is. Just giving a larger cage isn't going to do it because they do seek each other out to play this dominance game. They are just creatures that are designed to live separately. In Madagascar, I was lucky enough to come across a clutch of eggs that was hatching. I would be seeing these babies scurrying around still with soil on their skin. And all of those babies just scattered away from each other. And every time that I saw baby chameleons in the wild, they were alone. There was no grouping. They establish territories, avoid unnecessary conflicts, come together for mating, and then separate. So when we raise them in captivity, we need to respect that natural instinct and give them the space they biologically are designed to need. So how do you implement individual caging? Well, ideally, you would use the adult-sized cage to raise the hatchling up from day 1. I know that goes against what we've generally done in the community, but the advantage of having a large cage is that you can create multiple microclimates and your baby can take care of itself. The smaller the cage you put the baby in, the more you're responsible for knowing which microclimates they need at any given time. If you go down to nursery cages used by professional breeders, you get maybe 2 microclimates in those small cages, and it takes a breeder's experience and skill to know how to put that together. But if you get the adult size cage, you have a whole lot of microclimates, and so you don't have to know the exact microclimates they need. You can just provide a multitude of them and let the baby take care of itself. I know that there's some concerns about a large cage. The first is that the baby won't be able to find food. That can be in any size cage if you just release feeders into the cage. That's why we have feeder run cups. And I have a fruit fly mash cup. I take a deli cup, I fill it with a fruit mash, and then the fruit flies just come and they stay. And so there is no place in a 2x2 by 4 foot tall cage or a 4x2 by 4 foot tall cage. The baby won't know what's going on in every single corner. They're designed to live in Madagascar. Believe me, they look much further than 4 feet looking for food and potential predators. Second, there's a concern that a lot of wide space will stress out the baby. Well, this is true because these little chameleon babies are essentially nature's candy. Everything eats them, even large insects. And so, yeah, they're going to want to have a lot of hiding spaces. But the key is you don't give them a small cage, you give them a large cage filled with a lot of different hiding spaces. That large cage is not there for airspace. It's there for you to create mini microclimates. And another concern is that the baby will fall. This is not a valid concern. Chameleons are designed to stay in the trees, and they're not going to just fall. So you don't have to give them a small cage because you're worried they're going to bounce off the bottom. The cages don't have to be fancy. Depends upon how much of an investment you want to make, how long you want the cages to last. The important thing is that the babies are raised individually. Babies are better kept individually in smaller cages than in groups in larger cages. But remember, ideally, you just use the adult size cage. Commandment 2, verify your chameleon's location before you open or close the door. I have seen too many heartbreaking accidents because a chameleon and the door are in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the chameleon is injured by the door either opening or closing. Hatchlings are tiny, they're fast, they're unpredictable, and it's not always easy to find them inside of the cage. Not only can they be anywhere, but that tail of theirs just snakes around all over, and sometimes it snakes into dangerous places. There are 4 danger zones to specifically watch out for. The first danger zone is simply opening the cage door, especially on screen cages. If your chameleon is half on the door and half on the top panel and you open the door, that could damage their feet or legs. And the thing is, they could be anywhere along the perimeter of the door. The second danger zone is internal latch mechanisms. Some cages have latches that have parts on the inside of the cage. And often those latch mechanisms are in hard to see places. Well, where does the chameleon who likes to hide like to hide? Hard to see places. So when you're unlocking and locking, keep an eye on where the latch mechanism is. The third danger zone, and this is a big one, is the hinge side of the door. If a baby chameleon is hanging out at the top, the latch side, or the bottom of the door, it's generally easy to see when they're around there, but the hinge side has the door blocking your view. But if a chameleon is around there, it's very easy for them to scooch their body into the space left by the door that you just opened, or have their tail snake around the corner, which their tails do everything and they're everywhere. And so if you end up closing the door without looking, you could be closing it on a chameleon or their tail. And I hate to say how many times we've seen chameleons with 2 kinks in their tail that perfectly match being closed in a door. All of this needs to be avoided, and you do it by verifying where your chameleon is before you open and before you close the doors. And I know when we get in a hurry and taking care of everything, we forget to check where the chameleon is. Do not let yourself fall into the trap of forgetting to check where your chameleon is. And the fourth danger zone is, well, unexpected dropping behavior. Baby chameleons use dropping out of the branches as a defensive mechanism. It's a quick way to get away from some predator. And so if you're opening the door or closing the door, that could trigger this sudden dropping. And if your chameleon is on the door or very close to the opening, this could help them escape, or it could get them in the wrong place at the wrong time and have the door closed on them. Once again, verify the location of your chameleon before you open or close the doors. It is the only way to prevent these kind of accidents, and you have my permission to be paranoid. Be very paranoid. I am serious about this. You don't want to experience crushing a chameleon in the door. Commandment 3, incubate your chameleon eggs until they hatch or they mold. Oh, I know how hard it is to be patient. We chameleon keepers have to wait 9 months, 12 months, even 24 months for our eggs to hatch. The snake breeders think we're crazy. But can we really choose our afflictions? Not when chameleons are so awesome we can't. Anyways, you have your first eggs and you have your due date as to when they're supposed to hatch. And then when they go beyond that, what do? You start to worry? Well, there really isn't anything you can do. But if you look at them, and they are nice and white, then they're healthy. If they are actively fighting off the mold spores that are all around, then they are alive and they are healthy. Experienced breeders know that if the eggs are healthy, you just keep incubating them. Now, I know this is more than just being impatient. You have to plan for when you're going to have a lot of food on hand. So I recognize the sense of urgency to know when they're going to hatch. Unfortunately, the eggs do what they want to do, and nobody can know when they're actually going to hatch. It's just a situation that we all find ourselves in, and well, welcome to the club. Commandment 4, raise your chameleon hatchling in the largest enclosure possible. And here's where we conflict with the general community attitude that you need a grow out cage. You need a smaller cage to raise your hatchling because they're so small. And I will say that that is not going to harm your chameleon, but especially if you're just starting out, it is much easier to keep a hatchling chameleon in an adult-sized cage. It gives you the opportunity to create a larger environment, many more microclimates and gradients for them to choose from. And I know someone's saying, yeah, but I'll never be able to find my chameleon and see how well they're doing. The ironic thing is that the more hiding spaces you give them, the more secure they feel and the less they use the hiding spaces. So I gave my chameleon hatchling a 2x2 by 4 foot tall cage heavily planted, and the little guy was on the tops of the leaves. Sure, there were times where I wouldn't see them because he was deep inside of the leaf cover, but every couple of days, he'd be up on top trucking around. There was no time that I spent more than a couple of days without seeing him. The smaller cages are actually more difficult because you have fewer microclimates, and so you need to get it exactly right. Leave that to the more experienced breeders who need space savings. Now, if you are a beginning breeder and you don't have the space for 30 adult cages, then get the biggest cages possible. Just know the smaller the cage, the fewer the microclimates, and so the better your husbandry has to be. And that works out fine because it's the serious breeders that need to have the most space savings. And so we have the most experience going with the smallest cages. That works out. And commandment 5 is always have food available. Hatchling chameleons are in a race against time. They need to get as big as possible as soon as possible. And so you want to fuel those growth spurts. That means always have food available. It doesn't mean that you have food crawling over every surface. That is just going to stress out the little baby. No, it means that you have it always available. Like you always have some crickets or grubs or whatever you're feeding in the feeder run cup. You always have a fruit fly cup sitting there with the fruit mash, and so there's flies flying around it. Their job is to grow, and so you need to make sure they're able to do that. Now, it's true, as they get to an adult, you want to ease off on that so they don't get obese, but as long as they are in their growth stages, make sure there's always food available. Now, obviously, there's so much more to learn about how to take care of hatchlings, but I will say the larger the cage you have, the closer it is to how you take care of an adult chameleon. You just have to make sure that you don't overpower those little bodies with too hot of a basking spot and too much UVB. But other than that, if you're keeping them in an adult-sized cage, the care is almost identical. It's when you get into the smaller cages that it becomes more and more specialized. And so there are many more episodes in the pipeline talking about hatchling care. But for now, take those 5 commandments to heart because they're going to give you a solid foundation to build upon. My name is Bill Strand. Thanks for joining me here. I'll see you next time.